What's going on, everybody? Today we're back in the shop, back working on the 240, and today we have another adventure, another project we're going to be working on, and we're going to be saying goodbye to the factory rear end of the car. If you take a look on the inside of here, as you can tell, we've already done some cutting in the trunk, but today, to get more prepared for the next season, we're going to be getting rid of the entire rear end to allow for us to install the new 2F rear end that we have. We have new rear over fenders, a new trunk, and we're going to be saying goodbye to all of this. So without further ado, we're going to start disassembling the rear end, taking off everything that we can for now. So over fenders, bumper, trunk, all of that's going to come off to expose whatever's underneath, and we'll get to work on cutting. So with the easy parts off, as I said before, you can see that we've already done some weight reduction back here to make room for the quick change in the fuel cell that we threw in earlier this year. But now we're really stepping it up. We're going with the entire 2F rear end, which my friend Dan Savage runs the same rear end on his car. I'll put a picture of that here. He's the one that recommended that we do this. It'll allow for much less weight in the rear end, and everything will be way softer in the rear, so hopefully I don't, but if I do end up crunching up the rear, it'll take it a lot easier, because the fiberglass that we'll have is much softer than this factory metal. It'll also allow for us to run the car a little bit lower, because as you can tell, these over fenders that are on the car right now, they're somewhat flat. They do obviously have a little bit of a wider fit than the stock panel, but these 2F panels are much wider. You can see the flare in the fender. The tire will be able to tuck up into that. We'll have more room for suspension travel and hopefully some better ride height. This is another bit of work that we've been doing behind the scenes. Not the best lighting, but we went ahead and threw an MA Motorsport or Alaria Tech S13 trans tunnel in here. The amount of power that we'll have for next year, we're going to need a stronger transmission, so we're going to be throwing a dog box transmission in this thing for the next season, and the trans tunnel is just to allow more room for that to sit and for more room to work on it while it's in the car. So that thing will be nice and beefy for us next year. And now, getting ready to take off the side skirt in order to help get a step closer to ripping these off. Oh my god. You know, I could have assumed that it wasn't going to be pretty under here, but I don't think I imagined it would be this bad. Obviously, seen some scars. That thing is pushed all the way in, and this looks like it has not been washed since the 1840s. Yeah, that's all caked on there. But, got one side off, one more to go. This right here is definitely worse than I could have imagined. I'm not sure how much justice the camera will do, but this entire quarter is crunched in. It's hard to show just how much on camera, but that is crazy. Similar story over here. Not as terribly crushed in this spot as the other side, but definitely these quarters have lived a bit of a rough life. Here's a fun spot right there. Crazy seeing all this stuff exposed for the first time in probably 4 years or so since those over fenders have been put on the car. I lied about it not being too bad. It was just caved in a different spot. After about a year of drifting already on this car, it was 2023 or 22, I think. We were drifting at Langley Speedway, and obviously you guys know Zach. We had a little accident, and that was one of the first collisions that I ever had with this car. And ever since then, it's like that was just the one thing that started it all. Been feeding the crap out of the car ever since. So we've got the rear end looking about as stripped as I can remember having it for a very long time. just about everything that connects the rear end to essentially the fuel cell forward has been disconnected, and we're almost ready to start cutting. As far as where we're going to start snipping, I know that it's around here that we're going to start our first cut, because for the rear end that we're going to be doing, we essentially keep from here around this area forward, because yes, we're getting rid of the entire back of the car, but we still want to make sure we have a place for those replacement panels to connect to with the stock body. So for our first cut, we might start around here somewhere and then maybe work our way up and trim more as needed. But getting ready to say goodbye to all of this, which is crazy. We've got a whole pile formed of everything that's come off the car so far. Old bash bar, over fenders, the new panels that we're going to be throwing on the car, the tail lights, and as always, whenever you're doing work like this on a car, we've already got a little pile down there at the bottom. I always think it's a brilliant idea to keep track of everything you take off. Put everything in a bag, label it, trust me, your future self will thank you later. And for those of you who don't already know, I mentioned it earlier on in the video, but we've already done some work in the rear end. As you can tell, I haven't been running a trunk for a while. For those who don't know, I already have been running a Bulldog quick change, a radium fuel cell, and of course a firewall to act as a safety measure with that. I've been running all of those for around a year now, so we've already done some work in the rear end, but now we're really stepping it up, getting rid of all of this and making some room for some 2F. Getting ready to go in for the first cut. My dad's got the Sawzall. Going in. That's one side down, one to go. And like I stated before, this is the first cut. There will definitely be some more trimming after this. This is just the initial, get most of it off, and then we'll trim it up and get everything where we want it later on. Well, there's that washer I've been looking for. I've been trying to find this thing for months. He hit it in there. But, wow, initial cut. That thing is looking crazy. This poor antenna. I don't even know how this thing survived. That is wild looking. You have got to be kidding me. What a shame. Just ripped the antenna off. Now I'll never be able to listen to music with this thing ever again. So we've got the rear end cut off the car. As you can see, it's sitting on the ground behind us, and right now we're just mocking it up. But the 2F is on the car, and it looks amazing. The fit is phenomenal. It's just being held on by a couple of vice grips onto the car. But I love the way that this changes the rear end. I like the fender flares because before it was more of like a flat style of a flare, while this comes down and then flares out really aggressively over the wheel. It's got a similar width, but it definitely looks a little bit wider. So far, even though it's just a test fit, looks awesome. Definitely crazy to see, looking up in here, just how much room we will have in the rear end. I thought we already had a lot with the trunk out, but with the whole rear end cut off, it looks like you can sleep in here. Like I mentioned before, with how well these things fit, all of these body lines match up almost perfectly, and the line with the door, nice and flush all the way up. These things, you can tell, they're made very, very well. Very impressed with how these are fitting, much better than whatever we had to deal with before with fitting the old over fenders on. The comparison is night and day. I mean, these 2F panels are just mind-blowing. So as you can see, if you look up on the inside, this little lip is still part of the factory metal that we still have underneath. We're thinking about hanging onto this metal just so we can have something to bolt onto here with the new fenders. One issue that we are still facing right now is that my factory metal around this area is still dented in, so if you push this in flush with the metal, it creates that dent with the new panel, so we're going to try to figure out a way to push that metal out to create a nice surface for the new 2F to mount to. But besides that, everything is fitting on very nicely. We've got the quarter panels all nice and cleaned up, kind of showing off our old blue that we had before we respayed the car after the engine swap. But the current plan is, next thing on the list is to cut out our wheel wells. So what we're going to do is we put tape here, and we're kind of going off the line of the top of the door and just trying to run all the way to the back straight. So we're going to cut on the bottom of this tape line over past the wheel, and somewhere around this area here we're going to arch down so that we keep this factory metal on this side of the cut. This will be so that the 2F panel will have something to mount to on the bottom, as well as the side skirt will have something to mount to. And that way there's still somewhat of a rigidity back here in the rear without taking everything out. Obviously this car had over fenders on it already, and we've already been through and cut the wheel well decently higher than what it normally is from the factory, but to allow for even more suspension travel, and like I mentioned earlier, potentially a lower ride height for next year, we're going to cut even higher to allow more room for the wheel to come up into the arch of the fender. Trying to get a line figured out where we want to cut exactly this wheel well out to create our own archway for a fender. And so what we've done is we laid down a tape line here, same thing on the other side, and then we used an old front tire to trace this line out for an archway. More metal coming off of this thing. Yep. Oh wow. Check that out.
Hold on out.
Got some
Mouse still in there.
forms of life on the inside of this thing. Got Ratatouille in there. A short amount of cutting later and looking pretty sweet. This arch is way higher than it was, and that corner came out pretty nicely. So now just to come over to this other side, do some of that YouTube magic, and nice and fresh. Same thing we did on the other side. These wheels will have plenty of room to suck up into this fender. From this angle, it just looks absolutely absurd. Can't believe this is my poor 240. All of the rear of the car is just completely gone. You can see over in this part of the fender, this is the damage I was talking about earlier while the fenders were still on the car. This surface has seen some accidents and is very worn, so we're gonna have to find a way to push that out, try to even it out as much as we can, so we'll have a nice surface for the 2F to mount to. Now with all of this cut out of the car, this leaves quite a large gap for any potential water or anything to get up into the inside of the car. And so the next step is going to be sealing all of this off with some piece of metal to run up onto the inside of this and create our own sealed wheel well out of this archway that we've created. With all the progress we've made today, we're going to go ahead and start wrapping it up so we can head back home. And for now, we'll be tossing around some ideas for throwing that metal up in the inside of it to seal it up, different designs that we can be looking at trying to do, as well as cutting this a little further back before we start building a crash structure to come back out and support everything that happens in the rear. While we'll be looking at some ideas for that, I'm going to go ahead and call it for this video. But if you made it this far into it, I appreciate you for watching. Please be sure to like, comment, subscribe for more content, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
Do you lie awake at night? Are you afraid to turn out the lights? Is there something you're scared